Kevin Meagher, who used to work in Parliament and has learned a lot about politics ever since. Kevin Meagher, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows.
George. How are
Good
you?
to see you again. I'm good by the grace of God. Is he done for, Boris? And if so, what happens next? If not, when do you expect him to bounce back?
I think it's going to be a dead cat bounce. To horribly mix my metaphors, I think in the Monty Python sense, he's a dead parrot, an ex-politician. He's ceased to be. He's finito. I can't see any route back. There's technical route back. You can never say never in politics. And Boris Johnson, a bit like Trump, has kind of defied all the rules all the way through their careers. So perhaps you can never say never. But I think on all conventional wisdom, that's it. Boris Johnson is cashed out of British politics because, he's ridden his luck for a very long time. And of course, Boris is very fond of kind of, as a classicist, very fond of Greek and Latin metaphors. And, he is the proverbial Icarus. He's flown too far to the sun for too long. His wings have become unstuck and he's now crashed into the briny depths. And I can't see any way back for him. And I think you can sense that by the reaction to his resignation announcement last Friday, where even people who were among his strongest supporters, people like Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, who 18 months ago was kind of ensconced with Boris in the number 10 bunker, working the numbers on his infamous spreadsheet of Conservative MPs to see who would back Boris in any tight vote. So when people like Grant Shapps are pushed out or volunteer to go out to put the boot in to say, I'm sorry, Boris, you're off the pitch now, that's it. The game does carry on, but you're no longer a part of it. I think that's really significant. If you were advising Boris right now, and I'm sure there's a lot of dark muttering in a room somewhere. If you were advising him, you would say, there is realistically no way back here for you because your own party is tired of the psychodrama that you bring. And that's it. They've moved into a different position. They're trying to, in the 12 months that they've got left of this parliament before there's going to be an election, probably next May. It's Operation Patch Up the Boat. They're taking a lot of water on a lot of issues. As you say, the economy is in a very perilous position. Inflation is still very high. Energy prices, impacts of global events, but also a legacy of 13 years in government. Boris Johnson, succeeded Theresa May, who succeeded David Cameron. So the Conservatives have been in power for a very long time. And there's that sense that everything that's going wrong has kind of happened on their watch. And it's very difficult for a government to renew itself in opposition, in government rather. It usually happens in opposition, where you take a long, hard look at your record and change things and then come back. It's very hard to do that in government, but that's the challenge for Rishi Sunak over the next 12 months. And to be fair, if you had his cards, you wouldn't be particularly happy either. But I think Boris is done for.
It may have been a psychodrama, but at least it was a drama. What's happening now under Sunak and Hunt is a somnolent drift to the rocks, isn't it? They're not even really trying to avoid the crash that's coming.
It may well be that that they look back and say, actually, if we could have split the difference somewhere, and we could have had some of Boris's charisma and the fact that he did command attention for good or ill, but he's as is often the case in politics, deposed by very grey men, and as you say, those grey men have a huge challenge over the next 12 months, and it may be that it's too great for them. But Rishi Sunak is positioning himself as the antithesis of Boris Johnson. He's trying to portray himself as the details man, where Boris Johnson was the great sweep of history guy who didn't really understand how anything worked, but just had the big picture. Sunak is the small picture guy who is trying to, as I say, patch up the boat because they're taking on water on any number of fronts. Literally and metaphorically. Literally with the small boats issue, with migrants crossing the English Channel, right the way through to the big, the big kind of economic decisions and questions, and the crisis that we've got in so much of our public realm and public services in the NHS, and there's kind of the fact that over 13 years of austerity has now caught up with local authorities, with schools, with the entire public realm as well. So there's a lot of people very let down, driving along very bumpy roads because we've got huge potholes, teaching in schools that are now dilapidated, hospitals that are falling apart. They've been in power for a long time, and that record will start to stick to Sunak. And his challenge is to try and argue that he's on the right tracks. So give him a chance. He's not been there very long. Give him a chance for a few more years to have a go at fixing that. Now, it worked for John Major, of course, after Margaret Thatcher. John Major took over in November 1990. April 1992 went to the country, and John Major, already there, a bit of a joke figure, criticised for being a kind of political lightweight. And of course, he went on to record the highest number of votes cast for any winning party in British political history. Now, it wasn't that was a high watermark for him. The next 5 years were pretty dreadful, and of course the Conservatives got booted out in grand style in 1997 in the kind of the Blair years. But it may be a trick that Rishi Sunak is looking to replicate, which is to say, look, give me a chance. I look earnest, I sound earnest, I'm very uncharismatic, but I stay up late at night. I read my red boxes. I try and make the right decisions, and I try and be a reasonable person. And that will be the basis, I think, on which he'll try and fight the next general election campaign, which is, as I say, the antithesis of Boris, who was a larger than life character, had lots of flaws, lots of his flaws went before him, but it didn't really seem to ever dent his popularity. He had for a while a kind of political alchemy, but as I say, after a while that's kind of worn off, and he joins a long list of British prime ministers who ultimately find themselves out of office, having failed on the thing that they were supposed to be great at. So if you go back to Winston Churchill in the war, famously the roar of the British people. Well, the first chance the British people had after 1945, after the end of the Second World War, they threw him out in grand style. And they went for the mild and meek Clement Attlee, which may be how, as I say, Sunak is trying to position himself. Harold Wilson, whip smart economist, couldn't end that sense of post-war economic malaise. And he went in that sense. Jim Callaghan, the great trade union guy, goes after the winter of discontent. So that thing that sometimes Anthony Eden famously, of course, after the Suez debacle of 1956. So that thing that they're supposed to be good at sometimes becomes the thing that brings them down. So Boris Johnson, 10 years ago, as mayor of London, the most popular politician in the land by a country mile, a bit of a clown prince, but likable and unusual, a character. He now leaves Parliament muttering darkly about forces and conspiracies to bring him down, when actually, what's brought him down is his own personal conduct in Number 10. And these are not wild parties that he was having in Number 10. They sound like some of the worst parties anyone's ever organised, to be fair. But at a time when people were being ultra cautious and people were being fined for doing things much less, then Boris Johnson faces the charge that kills politicians. It's the charge of hypocrisy, of saying one thing and doing another. And eventually that's caught up with him. And that's why he is tonight cast out, and it's his own fault.
What about this thesis that I see advanced in certain quarters, that now there is effectively a split in the Conservative Party? Boris Johnson is very popular in the party. I have no doubt he still commands a majority in the Conservative Party outside, and a bigger section of the population, the 17.4 million people that voted for Brexit. Boris is disproportionately popular there, even though he made a cod of Brexit. The possibility of a Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Lawrence Fox, a kind of new, real conservative, if you like, as opposed to that slightly shady Johnny, who's now running things in Downing Street. The true blue blood Conservatives. Is that a possibility in your view?
I think it's interesting because there's a space. There's definitely a space, and Nigel Farage has been very keen to kind of try and offer a kind of smelling an opportunity, which is what he's been very good at. Whatever anybody thinks of him, he's been very good at that, sensing an opportunity, sensing a dissatisfaction in the country, and that is very, very real. No, could that be channeled into something? I think the thing about leaving the European Union and Brexit was that it was a goal, it was an objective. It was therefore realizable as soon as that referendum was promised by David Cameron, who of course thought that this would never happen, and that the kind of political consensus, the Westminster consensus, the Westminster class would rally round, and that would push out the extremists as they saw it. And of course, that's not what happened. And of course, I've said to people all the way since 2016 that be careful what you wish for. If there was a second referendum at any time over the last few years over returning back to the European Union, it's very likely the result will be exactly the same. I mean, you look at the polling and all this consistently since 2016. It's not. There's no dramatic oscillation. There's no buyer's remorse. There's not tens of millions of people saying, "Oh my God, what a terrible decision we've made. Let's reverse it." That's not the mood of the country. That's not the mood of the British public. And there is a space, and Farage inches around it, and others inch around it as well, to say, could you create some new political movement? But to do that, I think tactically, you need a project, you need a goal, you need something that you can latch onto. And at the moment, it's not obvious necessarily what that is. The Conservative Party now is entering managerial things.
Yeah, I suppose it is, and managerial politics has prevailed. But is there a hope for insurgent parties? I suspect that there is. You ask for a project. Let me give you one. A project which said there'll be no more immigration. There'll be no more boats coming across the channel. There'll be no more wokery and quackery and greenery. There'll be no more Regent Street where the Union flag gets pulled down and replaced by a Pride flag. In fact, Pride might be reduced back to the week it used to be rather than the month it now is. In other words, I'm painting you a culture war project, which, it would be a bit difficult for Boris to join that because, hey, he's a good time guy. But he could probably, if you'll forgive the pun, swallow that and join a project like that. I suspect there are substantial numbers of votes in that, Kev.
I think there would be. I mean, you look at the. If you were to say, this is on the back of the proverbial fag packet before cigarette smoking is completely banned, but on the back of a fag packet, if you were looking to galvanise that space, which is in some respects classically right wing, but is also socially right wing in a way that lots of working class voters might think, actually, I'm quite attracted to this. If you were to say, for example, borrow the tactics of Brexit, have a national referendum on an immigration figure that then compelled a government legally to say it can't rise above 30, 40,000 a year. Now, David Cameron sort of said in 2010, I'm going to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. And there was kind of guffaws that was impossible. Now, we're an island. It clearly isn't impossible if you press down hard enough to make it work. Now, potentially, if you were to say, let's have that as a goal, to push for a referendum on a national immigration figure that binded governments to therefore act. If you were to say, arguably, the 2010 Equalities Act, which underpins so much of what people call wokery or the minority rights agenda, if you were to scrap it or repeal it, what would happen then? There are things there that you could think, well, if you wanted to pick a fight and fuel and galvanise a culture war between social conservatives and in the British context, social conservatives does not mean conservative, large C conservative supporters necessarily. It means lots of Labour voters. A third of Labour voters voted for Brexit. There's millions of people who feel completely cut out of the political equation anyway. And as Mario Cuomo famously put it, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. If you could find some issues that captured that mood and channeled it, then potentially, of course, there is a space. The Parliament, the British political system, the British parliamentary system has been very good at freezing out small parties. Because of first past the post and all the rest of it, it's very difficult to kind of have equal support all over the country and win lots and lots of seats. But the phase that we're in with social media and the ability to connect people together in very large numbers, very cheaply and very quickly, poses all kinds of challenges to that system. Which in your instance, you've challenged that system. Farage has challenged it with UKIP. It can be done, and you do wonder sooner or later, particularly with lots of noise again on the liberal left about PR and moving towards PR, whether that might be the moment when actually British politics does change fundamentally. Because there's a lot of people who are not represented, do not feel represented, and do feel these cultural issues define their view of the world. And if somebody can capture that and give it a project, which might be, for example, as say a referendum on an immigration figure, for example, then that could be potentially a moment that again breaks through. Because again, the managerial politics that we see just sort of says things are impossible, and that's not what people want to be told in politics. People want to believe that change is possible. We've seen that on the left with the Corbyn surge. We've seen that arguably on the right with the Farage surge and even Boris himself. So that's so there is a mood for that, and I think people in the mainstream who feel that they are always perpetually in control of the narrative and the control of the levers of the machinery, should look at these things and actually be very concerned that actually, if you're not representing the centre of gravity of the British public, then that is a very complacent place to sit. I would suggest.
Lastly, Kevin, is it possible that he'll walk away from politics and, I don't know, maybe become as rich as Tony Blair?
I think he'll start doing some serious writing. You could well see, would having a long love affair with the Daily Telegraph, would he, and it's obviously up for sale. Would a new owner come in and say this would be a great way of starting off, making him editor? Would that be attractive to Boris? I suspect he would. He's in many respects a journalist first and a politician second. He's like a lot of people that sometimes come into politics that are big flamboyant characters that are not as interested in the governing of politics. And I think that's very much Boris Johnson. He may feel, look, I've been there, I've done that. I could still be a huge, significant figure. He'll make a lot of money, I've no doubt, on the speaking circuit. He was making a lot of money before he was, as a junior MP, doing that. So he won't be short of a bob or two. But it's that sense of once you've held these high offices, and he's still a very, a relatively young man with a young family, which will keep him young as well, that he will want to do something else. I've no doubt about that whatsoever. He's not going to go away, but he's not going to re-enter British politics in Parliament again. I think that door is now firmly closed.